All right. Good morning and good afternoon, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here participating in this conference. My name is Mohamad Bayan. I'm a Director of Enterprise Architecture at Schwab. I hope you all been enjoying the conference so far. In this session, we will talk about how to scale and shape distributed architecture decisions while enabling strategies, driving agility, and managing risk. But before we dive into this topic, I'd like to share a couple of statistics. Based on a recent report by Forrester, and based off a survey they conducted in 2022, surveying 767 global organizations, only 45% of the organization had some form of an enterprise architecture program. Even more striking, 30% of the organization had enterprise architecture department at some point, but they have been disbanded since then. And the cited reason for disbanding these enterprise architecture departments was the lack of impact they had within their enterprises. So I find this statistics to be interesting as they highlight the challenge that many EA programs face, which is providing tangible value to their organizations. So as an enterprise architecture professional, I understand that the challenges that come with establishing and operating an enterprise architecture function, ranging from the lack of executive support all the way to organizational barriers and disengaged stakeholders and others. However, perhaps the most pressing challenge that hinders many EA programs from maximizing the value they bring to the organization is agility. Many EA programs struggle to keep up with the fast-paced demands of their organizations. Also, at the same time, enterprise architecture function often encounter negative perception, including agility. EA is often perceived as too slow, impeding innovation. So as you can see, agility or the lack of agility is a common theme between the challenges facing EA and the negative perception surrounding EA. So if we take a step back and examine the type of decisions that an enterprise architecture practice typically deals with, one framework to consider is the enterprise architecture process view. In this view, enterprise architecture practice is divided or is made up of three main processes: strategic planning, technology optimization, and initiative delivery. In the strategic planning process, the main focus of EA professionals is the alignment of business and technology strategies. The majority of the decisions in this process are strategic and long-term in nature. The second process is technology optimization, and the main focus in this process is the overall quality of the IT landscape. This process is driven by some of the decisions made in the strategic planning process. We see in the technology optimization process a mix of long-term and short-term decisions that requires a good understanding of the enterprise with a long-term perspective on IT optimization. The third process is the initiative delivery. In this process, we design and implement solutions in support of specific business requirements. This process is also driven by the decision made in the strategic planning and then technology optimization processes. And in initiative delivery process, the majority of the decisions are tactical in nature. So EA as a practice is made up at a high level of three main processes, and they have a mix of strategic and tactical architectural decisions to be made. So if we think of what is the operating model, the EA operating model that would support these processes and the decisions that go along with them. So if we think of the operating model, we have to look at the traditional operating models. You have the centralization, you have the distribution, and the federation. In a centralized EA model, you have a central EA team that owns and manages the EA function, responsible for both strategic and tactical architectural decisions. And typically the goal of establishing such a model is to ensure consistency and alignment across the organization. On the other hand, you have the distributed model, where you have multiple teams distributed across the organization aligned to different business units. Each team within that business unit would own the architectural decision, both strategic and tactical, for that business unit. Typically, you would consider the distributed model if you want to give each line of business full agility and give them the ability to be responsive to their own specific needs. Thirdly, we have the federated model. In the federated model, similar to the distributed model, you still have multiple teams located in different parts of the organization, aligned to different line of businesses. But here you also have a central team, and the central team typically establishes the guidelines, and the central team owns some strategic decisions. The local team would own tactical decisions. They may own some strategic decisions, but they have to govern these decisions through the overarching governance framework established by the central team. The advantage of this model, you still give each business unit the ability to be agile and responsive, but you still achieve alignment at the organization strategic level. So each model has the pros and cons. An enterprise may have valid reason to adopt any of these models. However, from a trend perspective, the trend has been moving away from the centralized model and adopting the federated model. So if we look at the centralized model, as we said, a central team owns all type of decisions, it can easily become a bottleneck in the process, impacting speed to market. So architectural leaders then, what they tend to do, they start thinking, how can we promote ownership of some decisions to the local teams? But when they think of that, they have to worry about the challenge. How do we make sure these decisions that are owned by the local teams are mature decisions and they align with the enterprise-wide goals? So this is where you start thinking about federating EA, because you want to establish the guidelines, you want to give the local teams authority to make some decisions, but you want to govern these decisions. But even with federated EA, you still may be impacting the agility of the local teams, their ability to move, and their own speed to market. Because as they make decisions, they have to run them through the governance framework. And it depends on how complex that governance framework is. So if you want to give them full agility, that's where you start thinking about distributed EA. You want to promote the ownership and the governance of the architectural decisions by the local teams. But the challenge with the distributed EA, it comes with some concerns. Typically with a distributed EA, you may end up with a very complex architectures. You may end up with a complex IT landscape that is poor on consistency, poor on standardization, tends to have a higher cost. So there are concerns with going with distributed architectural decisions. So the question is there a way for us to enable full agility by distributing architectural decisions, but still achieving alignment at the enterprise level and still driving strategies and still managing risk? And this is a sample of an architectural decision framework that can help achieve that. And let's do a walkthrough of this decision-making process. A local team will identify the need to make a decision. And along with that, they would define the decision criteria that would guide that decision-making process. The first question they have to ask, is there any existing architectural guidance that the local team can use to make an informed decision? If the answer is yes, the local team is empowered to make the decision, recording, ending the process. If the answer is no, there isn't any existing architectural guidance, then the second question is, how significant is this decision? To answer this question, you have to have a risk, you have to assess the risk and the impact of that decision. And here we're having a risk and impact assessment model would be helpful to ensure you assessing these decisions consistently in an objective manner across the enterprise. If the output of the model that this is a low risk, low impact decision, you empower the teams to make the decision, record it, and end the process. If the decision considered to be enterprise significant, this is where you get into this iterative process of consult, advise, and evaluate options. The goal is, since it's a significant decision, you have to create more awareness and bring more visibility to that decision-making process. And you have to identify the key stakeholders that must have an opportunity to weigh in on this decision. The first group of stakeholders are the subject matter expert. anybody that's considered a subject matter expert when it comes to this topic, they should have an opportunity to provide their point of views. The second group of stakeholders are the impacted team. Any group or team that will be impacted by this decision must have an opportunity to weigh in with their point of view. Thirdly, it'll be great if within the enterprise you establish a community forum where you provide awareness and visibility into these decisions that's being made, so that community has an opportunity to weigh in also with their point of views. So you would run through this as many iterations as possible until the local teams have collected the advice and the point of views from the various stakeholders, documented the options, and they're ready to select an option and make a decision, and then they record it. If that translates to an updated architectural guidance, that will need to be reflected back to the architectural repository. Now, throughout this framework or this process, you will be re-evaluating and updating the decision criteria as needed. So let's walk through an example. Let's say you want to use this framework to evaluate and select a technology product. The local team will identify the need for a new technology capability. Let's say, for example, a NoSQL database. The first thing they got to do is assess, are there existing technology standards and technology usage guidelines that can guide them into the decision of selecting a NoSQL database engine? If it is, they make the decision, they end the process. And that speaks to the more mature of an architectural repository and an architectural standards and reference architecture that you have in your organization, the more and more decisions can be made by the local teams without having to consult with anybody else. Let's assume in this scenario, there isn't any existing standards or an existing guidance around what to use for a NoSQL database. Then you would go to the next step. Is this a high risk, high impact decision? And that would be depending on the criteria and depending on the model. And the beauty of this risk and impact assessment model, it gives the enterprise architecture team a way to fine tune it to whether they want to, depending on the risk appetite of the organization, whether they want to route more to the consultant advice or whether they want to empower the local teams to make more of the decisions. So you have a way to play with the criteria to influence the outcome, whether more to go to consultant advice or more to go to the local teams to make. Let's say in this example, that's a high risk decision because probably you need this database engine with, across the enterprise for various use cases. So you would go into the consult, advise, and evaluate options. So the first group is the subject matter experts. This is where you pull in your database engineers, your database architects, your data architects, your platform architects or engineers. They all need to weigh in with their expertise and provide a point of view. The second is anybody will be impacted by this decision. Definitely any team who will be supporting, establishing, setting up, or supporting the engine, the database, will have to give an opportunity to provide their point of view. Security, most likely, is always an interested stakeholders in providing their point of views, and so on and so forth. Thirdly, it'll be good to give your community visibility into the fact that you're evaluating or you're looking at a NoSQL database engines, because somebody in the community may have a similar requirement in the near future or thinking about leveraging that capability for some of their applications. That will be an opportunity for them to also to get plugged into the process. Once all of this has been evaluated and the feedback has been collected, the local team will be able to make a decision. Now, one thing to call out, identifying the stakeholders, identifying the subject matter experts should not be on the local team. There should be a mechanism established as part of this framework to inform the local teams who are the subject matter expert that needs to be consulted. In this scenario, let's say you're dealing with a technology. You must have a taxonomy and a way to categorize technologies, and then you map or you align the different categories in the taxonomy to the various subject matter experts. So, for example, you may say, I classify or I categorize all databases under this category, and every time I'm making a change to the product within this category, I got to consult with A, B, C, and D, for example. And of course, you have the decision criteria, and that evolves as you run this process, whether it's from a business fitness perspective, cost, non-functional requirements, integration, vendor supports, and others. So to go back and summarize, so basically you're enabling agility by distributing the architecture decisions to the local teams. And And to be able to do so effectively, you have to be able to differentiate strategic versus tactical, high risk, high impact versus low risk, low impact, because not all decisions should go through the same exact process. The due diligence should depend on the criticality, and the significance of the decision. So this way also you're still managing risk because you have that risk assessment model. Anytime you say it is a high risk, you're getting more visibility, you're getting more stakeholders engaged to ensure the risk is being managed. This way you're also still achieving alignment to your business and technology strategies and the enterprise-wide goal strategies. Why? Because in the first step, if you have an architecture guidance, you're making a decision in alignment with the strategy. In the next step, if it's high risk, you're consulting more people. That also ensures alignment on the strategies. Third, you're improving your collaboration because on some of these decisions, you bring in the right stakeholders into the decision-making process. That improves collaboration, and that drives early adoption because your subject matter expert, your impacted teams, they are they are all part of the decision-making process, which gives you early adoption. Finally, this gives you a good way to document the stakeholders, the point of views they provided, the options that were evaluated, even the risk and the impact of the decision based on the criteria used at the point, any feedback from the community. All of this will be documented as part of this framework. So this is basically evolving your EA operating model. This is an evolution of both the distributed and the federated EA operating model. You have the center of excellence EA operating model, where you still have, like in distributed, you still have multiple teams that are distributed across the organization, aligned to different business units, and they own both the strategic and the tactical decisions for that line of business. But also you have a central team, similar to the federated model, you have a central team. But the difference, the central team here does not own strategic decisions and does not own an architectural governance framework. What they do, they establish the framework, the processes, and the tools needed for the local teams to enable the local teams to make both strategic and tactical decisions while also still achieving alignment of enterprise-wide goals. So in summary, prioritize your architectural decisions. Not all architectural decisions are of equal importance. You got to be able to tell the strategic high risk, high impact from the tactical low risk, low impact. Establish an architectural decision framework so you can achieve agility by distributing the architectural decision, but at the same time, you want to ensure they are mature decisions and they still meet your enterprise-wide goals. Establish a model to assess the risk and the impact of the decisions, and you must have a mechanism to identify who are the stakeholders that need to be consulted and give them the opportunity to provide their point of view and their advice for that decision. You need to set up few tools, including an architectural decision record tool, so you can store the decision along with the stakeholder that were consulted, the advice you received from each stakeholder, the feedback you got from the community, the options that were evaluated, and the option that was selected along with the rationale. All of this, as you do that, think of how you're evolving your EA operating model toward a center of excellence, where the central team owns and manages EA, including the tools, the frameworks, the processes. They define EA, what is EA, how you do EA. But when it comes to executing EA, that goes to the local teams. The local team will execute EA. The local team will own both strategic and tactical architectural decisions, but they do that within the framework established by the Center of Excellence. Thank you for your attention, and we can now proceed to any questions. Thank you, Henrik. Appreciate it. What would you say have been your biggest learning so far? I think establishing this model, it takes a change of a mindset and a change of the culture. Number one, I think it requires a good culture, a collaborative culture, um, a partnership driven type of culture for this type of model to work, where you set up the central team to be more a center of excellence, and you empower the local teams to make 100% of the architectural decisions. To be able to do that and still achieve your strategic goals and to still achieve your alignment to some of your business and technology strategies, it requires a good collaboration and a good culture. I think that would be one key takeaway. Uh, are you using this model in your organization? And if so, how many local teams are part of it? We are in the process of transforming to this model. We've made good progress. There are still some strategic decisions where we guide the process. We more facilitate. We play the role of consultant and advisors. There's still a few things where we still make the decisions, but we are moving toward this direction. And the way we have the local team, it's every line of business has its own local team. It's like a federated architecture model where you have a group of architects sitting in that line of business, and they own the strategic and the tactical architecture decision for that line of business. So it depends on the line of businesses. Do you have issues with understanding of the empowerment for the local teams? Yeah. What you'll find, like any other transformation, um, the maturity of the local teams is not the same. Some will be more mature, and it's easier for them to adopt this model. It's either for them to follow, to execute within the framework. For others, it's not. It takes a lot of communication. It takes a lot of training. It takes a lot of back and forth, because remember, the central team plays a key role in ensuring the framework and the process is being executed properly, because if it doesn't, it defeats the purpose. So the central team, we find ourselves, let's say with local team A, we have minimal effort or minimum engagement to ensure they're running through the process correctly. With local team B, we tend to put a lot more effort, a lot more training, a lot more two-way communication back and forth to ensure they're running through the framework properly. So yes, sometimes there are issues, but I would say it depends on the local teams, on the organization, on the maturity, but it will take a lot of, like any change management, you do a lot of communication, you do a lot of trainings, and you gotta keep constantly reminding them of the best practices to follow. 100%. And that's why, if you remember the previous question, I asked that culture and collaboration and partnership is key. I think for this model to work, you gotta have a very good collaborative culture. You gotta have a very good partner-based culture. Otherwise, it's difficult, because at least this is what I've seen it work, is when we have this kind of culture. I think there will be a different set of challenges if you don't have the right culture to support it. Is this a top-down driven model, or do you have to get buy-in from the teams? It's both. We have alignment with the top leadership, and we have alignment with the buy-in from the teams. Um, the way we have it established, actually, every line of business has a chief architect. So the alignment that for this to work, we get alignment with the chief architects, and we have alignment with our top leadership. So you have a small group. It's not like the whole organization has to align on it. Let's say you have 10 line of businesses, we have 10 chief architects, and then we have the central team and the top leadership within the central team. That's where we get alignment on the model, and that's where we ensure we implement it together in partnership collectively. How do you get buy-in from the management, and how does the executive branch see the strategic value of the EA capability? So we have buy-in from the management the buy-in from the management on let's say from the EA leadership and from a top organization on top of EA, it's mainly that we're enabling agility, and that's the selling point. And then, but at the same time, we focus on building a proper architecture repository. We put proper architecture guidance in place. We we have the risk and assessment model to ensure high risk, high impact items are being identified and due diligence is being done there. So we convince the top leadership that we still have due diligence, we're still ensuring risk is being managed because all those are important. At the same time, we are delivering agility because we're enabling the teams to run faster with their speed to market. From the local team perspective, I think it doesn't take much to sell it to them. They love the idea that they have ownership when it comes to the architectural decisions within their organizations. They have ownership on both tactical and strategic decisions. Sometimes it takes a bit of effort from us, from a consulting and from an advising perspective, let's say, to get them to move forward on ensuring they have their own blueprint, ensuring they have their own strategic point of views, so we can establish the architectural repositories. But again, the culture and the partnership of the piece of the culture helps a lot. And Henrik, I agree. I've worked for many enterprise architecture functions and different enterprises, and I've seen EAs in different flavors. And yeah, some organization would struggle with one model; it cannot work. Some other organization will excel at a specific model. I think it depends on the executive support. It depends on the leadership expectation. It depends on the culture and the behaviors in the organization. You need the right culture, you need the right partnership, you need the right support for such a model to work. All right, I guess Sonia is telling us we're out of time. Perfect. Thank you all. Appreciate it. Thanks for your attention. Thanks for listening. Have a good one.